Hare Krishna. This is the devotees here. Hare Krishna Madhupati Prabhu in Jagannath. I'm sorry, I was a few minutes later. So, shall we go ahead and start, or? Hima Jagannath Prabhu.
Yes, Prabhu, you may start.
Okay, thank you, Prabhuji. So we'll just say a few prayers. Gora Draganya Gana Gotra Goloruharam Goranga Gura Tama Gopyara Kopa Briksham Gopala Gada Rati Dhamyati Singha Gora Govinda Deshi Kavaram Satatam Namam Uttama Adama Kichuna Bachi Jachi Adileka Kola Kahe Premananda He Mona Goranga Dvidoya Dadiya Bola Gaja Goranga Kaha Goranga Laha Gorangera Namare Jai Jana Goranga Bhaje Se Hoyamara Pranare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Yashaiva Padambuja Bhakti Labhya Prema Vidana Parama Pumarta Tasmai Jagan Mangala Mangalaya Chaitanya Chandraya Namo Namaste Chaitanya Chandraya Namo Namaste Chaitanya Chandraya Namo Namaste Madgavyarapi Gopala Srikriyat Kripaya Jari Tadaiva Sambhaya Pitva Rishi Yustat Priya Janaha Shri Krishna Krishna Chaitanya Sasanatana Rupaka Gopala Raghunatha Brajabala Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Giradha Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare. So I'd like to thank the devotees in New Jersey for asking us to speak about this topic tonight. Just give me a moment. It's a little difficult topic because it's a very involved thing. And really, on these kind of things, it's the best if we hear in a consecutive way from the same person. Because then things can be brought out in the same way, and I don't know who has been giving the last few classes. It doesn't really make a difference either, but I'm sure that what I'll be presenting will be in a little different mood. Still, there's also some nice quality to that also, to hear from different persons. So this Siksastaka verse 4, you could speak about, I think, for many, many months, as you could with each one of the verses in Siksastaka. And just to start off, I'd like to just say a few words from Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Bhajan Rahasya, and how he describes that the Hare Krishna Mahamantra has 16 names, which are divided into 2 pairs of 8. And according to these 8 pairs, he says Mahaprabhu is given the 8 shlokas of Siksastaka prayer, which also correspond with the 8 different pastimes of the day, and with Rupa Goswami's description in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu of the dosh, Shraddha, Sadhu Sangha, beginning with faith, going all the way up until praying. And so just to review a little something about this, to build on what Bhaktivinoda is saying, he says that the first pair of names, Hare Krishna, corresponds with the first verse of Siksastaka, which describes Shraddha. And our acharyas have also described that first verse, Siksastaka, Cheto Darpana Marjanam, it gives an essence of the entire Siksastaka prayer. Everything is packed in that first verse. So that first verse describes chanting with faith, with Shraddha. The second prayer of Hare Krishna corresponds with the second verse of the Siksastaka, which corresponds with Anartha Nibriti in Nam Namakari Bahuda Sarva Shaktis, corresponds with Sadhu Sangha and Anartha Nibriti. And in the third verse, Tanadapi Sunichena, corresponds with Nishta Bhajana Kriya. It gives 4 different results of Niraparad Bhajan. And then the fourth verse, the fourth pair of Hare Krishna words, corresponds with Ruci. Bhaktivinoda Thakur says Ruci Bhajan. So we'd like to say something based somewhat on Bhaktivinoda Samodana Bhashya commentary, and a little something on the Vibriti commentary of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, as well as some things Srila Prabhupada says, and some other things according to our own realization based on these things. So first of all, let's look back at the previous verse. In this verse, Bhaktivinoda Thakur comments that by chanting the names of the Lord, free from offenses, and the 4 symptoms mentioned in verse 3 will manifest in his heart. Those 4 symptoms are what I think you heard last week. They're the 4 symptoms of niraparad chanting, 4 symptoms of chanting without offense, tanadapi sunichena, which Bhaktivinoda Thakur comments on. He says this means vishaya virakti janita dainyam. Tanadapi sunichena, he says, means natural humility born of complete detachment from sense objects. This is the first symptom observed in a sadhak who chants the holy name of Krishna free from offenses. The second symptom, he says, is nimratsrata lankrita doya, or compassion, which is nimratsrata, completely free, lankrita, of any kind of envy. This corresponds with the second, this is the second symptom, todor api sahisnuna, where one feels himself as humble as a blade of grass. Then the third symptom, which corresponds with the manina, to give respect to others, he defines it in a very interesting way. He says, Nitya Abhimana Shunyata, that there's no abhiman, Nitya Abhiman Shunyata, that this purity of heart and freedom from false ego, this is amanina. To be able to give respect to others means that our heart is completely pure and we have Nitya Abhiman Shunyata, we don't have any false ego. The fourth symptom, which corresponds with manada, Bhaktivinoda describes in his commentary as sarvesham yatta yogyas amanana chaitani lakshani, an attitude of respect according to everyone, according to their position, or as he described in the famous song Gurudev Kripa Bindu Diya, which is also a commentary on this song, in this verse, Tanadapi Sunichena. He says, Deho Nata Jata Jata, that we should give respect to everyone according to their particular position. Now, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, when he speaks about the Nadhanam Najanam Nasundaram verse, he divides the verse into 2 different categories, Anvaya and Vyatireka. This is a little bit apparently of a takeoff on the famous verse in the 2nd canto of the Bhagavatam, Anvaya Vritayekavyam Yat Shat Sarvata Sarvata, which describes how the Bhagavatam gives both a positive assertion, Anvaya, and a negative assertion, Vyatireka. And Bhaktivinoda comments, he says a very powerful thing about this verse, which I hope we all meditate on. which will give us some inspiration to try to come to this point. But first of all, this verse, Nadanam Najanam Nasundarim Kavitam va Jagadisha Kama Yemama Janmani Janmanishvari Bhavatad Bhaktir Hoitaki Twahi. The verse, the sense in the verse is that it's a prayer. It's not just referring to a particular status, but it's referring to a desire for a status. And Bhaktivinoda says that if we don't go past this third verse of Siksastaka, Trinadapi Sunichena, and develop the 4 symptoms of Niraparad Bhajan, he says, if we don't then come to the point of giving up all connection with the sensual happiness of this material world, if we don't give up all connection with the sensual happiness of the material world, then the realization of our spiritual form won't arise. And he says then that without the awakening of our spiritual identity, bhakti, whose essence is Vladini Shakti, it can't be transformed into bhav bhakti, which indicates that some ecstatic love is coming. We'll hear about this next, in the next verse of Siksastaka. So Bhaktivinoda says that, first of all, this verse begins with the Vyatirek, or the negative. The first 2 lines of this verse, this is a little technical, try to follow something with us. There's a lot of benefit. Bhaktivinoda says some very, very deep things with this. The first 2 lines indicate the Tatastha Lakshana, or the external symptoms of bhakti, the external characteristics. And they show, indirectly, they show the pure character, sadhana bhakti, in the form of nam sankirtan by indicating the negative. In other words, that this Tatastha Lakshana refers to characteristics which are visible byproducts, which are excluded from the object. So they help to define the object by describing what is not, right? So this pure bhakti is not. Na dhanam, na janam, na sundarim, kavitam va, jagadisha kamaye. It's not these things. This is it begins with the vyatirek, the negative. And then the second 2 lines of the verse indicate the surup lakshana, or the intrinsic positive characteristics of bhakti, which are the surup, or fundamental nature of bhakti. And what are those? Mama janmani janmanishvare bhavatad bhaktir ahoitaki twayi. And Srila Prabhupada translates this verse, O Lord of the universe, I do not desire material wealth, materialistic followers, a beautiful wife, or fruit of activities described in flowery language. All I want, birth after birth, life after life, is unmotivated devotional service unto you. So Bhaktivinoda says that this anvaya, the second 2 lines, which indicate the surup lakshana, so little technical terms. Someone asked me recently, we were giving some class, and we use a lot of different technical terms, and they were a little confused and said, what if we don't understand this? Does it mean we can't get to position? The words are not important. What's important is the ideas behind the words. There's technical terms which we use, which give devotees some faith. Oh, this is some scientific thing. This is very good. We should know something about this. But the particular language that's used is really not that important. In fact, you could even assign any random syllables practically to these things and use those as words to define different concepts. But the main thing is the concepts behind it. So Sarup Lakshana means that thing, the intrinsic qualities of bhakti, the fundamental nature of bhakti, which is indicated by the last 2 lines, Mama Janmani Janmanishvari Bhavatat Bhakti Rahoitaki Tvai. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, this intrinsic characteristic of bhakti is that it involves a cultivation of activities that are favorable to Krishna. Anukulyamaya Krishnanashila. Things which are actually favorable, appreciative to Krishna. So now in our discussion on this verse, we're going to be a little technical in the beginning, and then we're going to try to go a little more to how this applies to us, how we can see it. but we like to quote Shastra, we like to quote our acharyas. So Bhaktivinoda, he says that there are two external characteristics of bhakti, which are described by Rupa Goswami in his 11th verse in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Anyabhilasita Shunya. That's the first of the external characteristics of bhakti, that bhakti is devoid of all desires for anything other than Krishna's pleasure. It's shunyata. Other desire, anyabhilasita shunya. There's no other desire, just to please Krishna. That's bhakti. If there's some other desire to get some wealth, to be religious, to be famous, then that's not Sudha Bhakti. And Lord Kapila Dev describes in the 25th chapter of the 3rd canto that it may be Jnana-mishra Bhakti, it may be Karma-mishra Bhakti, but it's not Sudha Bhakti. It's mixed. The second external characteristic of Bhakti is that it's Jnana, Karmadi, Anavrita. It shouldn't be covered by fruitive activity. And Rupa Goswami says Adi, Karma Adi. Adi means etc. So in his commentary in this verse, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, this verse in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he says that Adi refers to Varnashram Dharma. Adi refers to Tyaga, renunciation. It refers to different religious activities. So bhakti, anabhita, shouldn't be covered by these things. And Jiva Goswami comments that some types of gyan, some types of karma are beneficial for bhakti, but it shouldn't be covering it. Karma, if someone thinks that Varnashram Dharma is the goal of bhakti, then Jiva Goswami says that's covering bhakti. It's not the goal of bhakti. Bhakti is the goal of bhakti. Or if someone thinks that unless I do bhakti, I can't, unless I do gyan, I can't, or karma, I can't get bhakti, then that's also covering bhakti. Because the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam says bhaktya samjayate bhaktya, that bhakti comes from bhakti. Bhakti is swarat. It's not dependent upon anything else. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he explains in his Sambodhana Bhashya that the word dhana, he defines as the wealth, it gives two different definitions. So first he defines as the wealth of religiosity of persons who are devoutly engaged in varnashram. And that's a kind of intoxication that, oh, I'm following varnashram dharma so very, very well and so perfect in this way. And they have this wealth. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in Jagannath Puri, he's offering his prayer, na dhanam na janam sundarim kavitamba jagadishakam himama janmani janmanishwari bhavatad bhakti. I don't want, na dana, I don't want this wealth of religiosity. Or Bhaktivinoda says that dhana can refer to all types of material enjoyment in this world as well as the heavenly planets, enjoyment of the senses and getting wealth and property. Dhana generally means wealth. So nadana, I don't want these things. This is a symptom of someone who's on the platform of Ruci. And Mahaprabhu next says najana, which Bhaktivinoda defines as women, sons, servants, maidservants, friends, relatives, like that, different persons who are going to follow us. I want a bunch of sycophant followers. And then Bhaktivinoda comments on Sundari Kavita. Mahaprabhu says that I don't want this Sundari Kavita, which Bhaktivinoda defines as flowery language. And he says, but this is ordinary knowledge related to mundane poetry. It's not referring to transcendental poetry, which describes Krishna's pastimes and like that. Now, this is a little different than what Srila Prabhupada gives. Prabhupada breaks the word into two, Sundarim and Kavitam. And Sundarim, he defines as beautiful ladies, and Kavitam, he defines as fruitive activities described in flowery language. I'd like to sing a few lines to you from the song in a minute. We'll see how Bhaktivinoda also sometimes use the word Sundari as refer to beautiful ladies. So it's not that one understanding is right and another understanding is wrong. For example, if you do a search in the folio for the verse Bhayam Dvitiya Binivesita Shat, you'll find that Srila Prabhupada gives at least 3 completely different definitions of that verse, bringing out completely different points. And it's not that one definition is right and another is wrong. They're all correct in their particular way. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, in his Bhariti commentary, he says that Sundari Kavita refers to material religiosity described in the Vedas. Dana refers to wealth in general, and Jana refers to wife, children, family, like that. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in his song, Kabhi Habhi Bolo Sedi Namar, he sings, Kabhi Habhi Bolo Sedi Namar, Aparadha Gucci, Shudaname Ruci, Kripa Bole Habe, Sanchara, Kabhi Habe Bolo Sedi Namar. Kabhi Habe, he says, please, when's it going to happen? Bolo, tell me, Sedi Namar, when that day will be mine, when Aparadha Gucci, when my offenses will cease. Sudanami Ruci, then I'll be able to taste the nectar of the holy name, which is indicated in the 3rd verse also by saying that Kirtaniya Sadahari, that someone can chant the holy name constantly because they have these 4 symptoms of Niraparad Bhajan. And they develop some ruchi, which is then described in the Nadanam, Najanam, the Sundaram verse. And he says that when will that day come? Kripa Boli Habe, Hridoye Sanchar. When by this divine grace, my heart will be infused with this power to have some ruchi, some taste for the holy name. And then Bhaktivinoda Thakur invokes the 3rd verse of Siksastaka, Trinadika Hina Kabini Jemani Sahisnuta Guna Ani Shakale Manada Apane Amani Hoi Aswadibo Sasara. When will that day come when Trinadika Hina, when I Nijamani, when I consider myself to be lower than a blade of grass, when I become very, very tolerant, Sahasnuta Guna Hridayeti, when I bring this quality, this guna of Sahasnuta, of tolerance into my heart, and then Shakale Manada, I give respect to all others. Apane Amani, I have no false pride. At that time, Ashwadiva Nama Rasasar. Then I'll be able to taste Svadya, Nama Rasasar. And then at that time, he evokes the 4th verse of the Siksastaka, which we're discussing today. Dhanajana Ara Kovita Sundari Boli Bona Chahide Sukha Kori Janmi Janmi Dao Ohe Gora Hari Ohoi Tuki Bhakti Charani Tumara. He says, Dhana Jana Ara Kobita Sundari. I don't want wealth. I don't want Dhana. I don't want Jana. I don't want followers. Kabita Sundari. I don't want beautiful women, like they're described in worldly poetry. Not chahi deho sukha kori. I don't want this deha sukh, this bodily pleasure, but rather janmi janmi dao. Please give me birth after birth. Or haitaki bhakti, charane tumar. Unmotivated devotion to your lotus feet. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, when he speaks about the 2nd, the 3rd and 4th lines of this verse, the 2nd part, the positive part of the verse, he says that of the Anvaya, there's 7 different symptoms of a Haitaki Bhakti. And we'll go over these. If you got into each one of these, it would be a very involved thing. But just to give us some idea of the depth of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's commentary and the depth of these Siksastaka verses, which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu composed at the height of his ecstasy when he was residing in Jagannath Puri. So the first of the 7 symptoms of Ahoitaki Bhakti are Phala, Anusandan, and Arahita. That someone has no result-seeking mentality. They're not looking for a phala, for a fruit in what they're doing. That's Ahoitaki Bhakti. That's a symptom of Ahoitaki Bhakti. I don't want something from it. Even I don't want peace of mind. As one of Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj Prabhupada's godbrother once said, if you want a peaceful life, you'll have to fall down from Vaikuntha. Because you have to fall down to Vaikuntha. Because in Goloka Vrindavan, there's so much anxiety for Krishna in so many different ways. So if we have any desire for ourselves that I'm doing this bhakti because I want to be peaceful, I want to solve my material problems, that's not a Ahoitaki Bhakti. That's some motivated bhakti. It's something else. It's not condemned, but it's not the Ahoitaki Bhakti that Mahaprabhu is teaching us about in the Nadanam Najanam Sundar verse. The second symptom of Ahoitaki Bhakti is Chinmoy Sabhava Ashraya. That this Ahoitaki Bhakti is Chinmaya, it's completely conscious, it's completely transcendental. The third symptom is Krishnananda Rup. This is the nature of Ahoitaki Bhakti. It gives great pleasure to Krishna. Whereas someone who has mixed bhakti doesn't give so much pleasure. This Ahoitaki Bhakti, the fourth symptom is, it's Sudha, pure. The fifth symptom is, it's Kevala, it's exclusive. This morning we were speaking on the 25th chapter, text 22, the third canto, and we were speaking about this verse from Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says that Vyavasyatmika buddhi ekeha kurunandana, indicating the same point, exclusivity, ekeha kurunandana, it's one-pointed. Bahu saka hinantascha buddhiya vyavasana. If you have so many different motivations, if you're paying attention to so many different persons, if the object of your devotion is many different persons, that's not exclusive. That's bahusaka. That's like many branches. Buddhiya vyavisayana. And such a person doesn't progress properly. The sixth symptom Bhaktivinoda describes of Ahoitaki Bhakti is that it's amishra. It's not mixed with anything else. It's pure. The seventh symptom is kinchana. It's free from all different material attachments. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he thus prays that let me just go on birth after birth. Because understanding that this described by Lord Shiva, Mukti Pradata Sarvesham Vishnu Eva, and some say there's no doubt that only Krishna, only Vishnu is a giver of liberation for everyone. And so I'm just dependent upon him, and whatever he wants, maybe he gives me liberation, or maybe he makes me take birth again and again. I don't mind. I'm not asking for anything. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur has also given a very wonderful description of this Nadanam Najanam Sundaram in Song 4 of his Gitavali. I'm not going to go there because our time is very short today. But I'd like to just now begin to discuss something, how this is practical for ourselves. One thing about the coronavirus that I've observed in the world today is we're seeing what life is really like. And this is something that I immediately appreciated. I was speaking about at Govardhan shortly after the virus started becoming well known and government started closing down and things. And I told the devotees that it's very good when we can see death to our face. Otherwise, we're just living in an illusion. And what is the value of our life? As a comedian, Ellen Goodman, she once said, normal is getting dressed in clothes that you buy for work and driving through traffic in a car that you're still paying for. In order to get to the job, you need to pay for the clothes in the car, and the house you leave vacant all day so you can afford to live in it. That's normal. So that's a very, very depressing situation. And as long as we're living in that so-called normal, which is actually not normal at all, it's just normal for the material world, then there's no question of us understanding our swarup, our spiritual swarup, and then there's no question of pleasing Krishna. And so we have to develop some ruchi. Thakur Bhaktivinoda, when he explains this verse in Bhajan Rahasya, this Nadanam Najanam Sundarim verse, he says this indicates ruchi bhajan kriya. This indicates bhajan with some taste. But Srila Prabhupada gives a very wonderful explanation, something similar, in a lecture he gave in one of his famous Nectar Devotion lectures in Vrindavan. This was on the 27th of October, 1972. Highly recommended. These are some of my favorite lectures from Srila Prabhupada, his Nectar Devotion series. Prabhupada was speaking, bear in mind, to a group of some of his most senior disciples. If you see photos, we have photos of some of these classes Prabhupada was giving in our ashram in Jagannath Puri. And you see a whole row of sannyas dandas in front of Srila Prabhupada. These are all the senior devotees. And what was Prabhupada telling them? Prabhupada said in this lecture, this shraddha has to be increased. Mm-hmm. Then when you come to the point of ruchi, Vasudeva Kata ruchi, that's the beginning of our perfection. That's the beginning. Nadanam Najanam Sundarim is the beginning. When we give up all this attachment for everything, then we can begin to understand something. Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, we can begin to understand something about our eternal swarup. And without giving up this attachment to these things, he says it's not possible. We can't begin to understand what our swarup is. So that's the beginning. Prabhupada says this ruchi is the beginning. Prabhupada goes on, listen carefully. At the present moment, there's no ruchi, no taste. Vasudeva Kata ruchi. There are so many exalted persons, but they have no ruchi, they have no taste. They've lost all taste. Vasudeva Kata ruchi. I was repeating it 3 times. There are 2 faults. Either people could not preach properly, so they could not create taste in the people in general. So Prabhupada is speaking this to the preachers, his main preachers. He said, the first fault is that they can't preach properly. They're not able to create a taste in the people. And then Prabhupada goes on, it's not the fault of the people in general. It's the fault of the so-called preachers. And then he explains further, because they could not create taste, they wanted to take the place of Krishna. That was their purpose. Imitation Krishna, imitation God. That will not do. So this kata ruchi has to be there. We have to come to this point of kata ruchi. And to come to that point of kata ruchi, we have to come to the point of niraparad bhajan, of giving up our false ego, nityabhimana shunyata, being amanina, means being completely free from false ego, vishaya virakti janita dainyam, having a natural humility which is born out of complete detachment for sense gratification. Nimratsrata laprita doya, we have to cultivate pure compassion, which is completely free from nirmatsara, or envy. And sarvesham yatta yogya amana chaitanya lakshanaya. We have to have an attitude of respect according to everyone according to their position. Otherwise, we can't have we can't progress properly in bhakti. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur repeatedly in Chaitanya Siksastaka and different places in his writings, he extols the devotees, he pushes the devotees, don't be attached to the lower rung. You're climbing a ladder. He said, now you have to go up a rung. Don't be attached, don't be afraid, I'm just going to stay here. Then you won't progress properly. So Jiva Goswami, in one place, he describes what is desirelessness, which is what this verse speaks about, the first 2 lines, Nadanam Najanam Sundaram. Prabhupada explains in his purport to Bhagavatam 2:3-10. He says, Srila Jiva Goswami has explained this desirelessness as Bhajaniya Parama Purusha Sukha Matasva Sukhatvam in his Sandarbha. This means that one should feel happy only by experiencing the happiness of the Supreme Lord. So this is this Nadanam Najanam Sundaram verse. This is one of the 7 symptoms of Ahoitaki Bhakti, that we're simply thinking of the pleasure of the Lord. And that pleasure comes when we associate with devotees and we hear Krishna Katha, the famous verse we like very much here in our ashram. Dhruva Maharaj, he prays to the Lord in 4th canto, chapter 9, text 11. He says, Bhaktim mohu pravahatam tvahime prasango bhuyadananda mahatam amalasayanam yen anjalo sabhanam uru vesanam bhavabdim neshye bhavad gunakatam tapanamatta. He says, my dear Lord, he says, Bhaktim muhu pravahatam tvahime prasangam. Please may always have intimate association, not just sangha, but prasanga, which in another place Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains, prasanga means something more, something higher than just ordinary sangha, but prasanga, intimate association with devotees who are practicing bhakti to you. And he says, by having this kind of bhakti, by associating with these devotees, initiate bhavad gunakatam mitapana matta. Pana, I'm going to drink this amrit, amritapana, this katamrit, this nectar of Krishna's pastimes, his gunakatamrit, his nectar of his qualities and pastimes. And by drinking this matta, I'm going to become mad. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in his explanation, this verse, he says, Sacha Shravana Kirtanadi Moi Bhakti Satsangam Vina Nasurasi Bhavatiti Satsangam Patayate. He says that bhakti, even though you're practicing hearing and chanting, there won't be any sweetness in that bhakti unless you have proper association. So this Nadanam Najanam Nasundaram verse is predicated upon the Tanada Pisa Nichina verse, which is predicated upon the previous verse in Siksastaka, wherein the Lord is describing, Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that he's indicating sadhu sangha. And by this sadhu sangha, I'm able to give up all these things. In his commentary, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he says that in effect, Dhruva Maharaj is raising his hands in the air with pride. And he's doing a very amazing thing, which I wouldn't recommend for everybody to do. He's saying to Maya, the material nature, bring it on. I'm not afraid. He said, I'm not afraid of material life whatsoever. He says, nothing is impossible for me because I'm going to be drunk. I'm going to be completely intoxicated with the nectar of your qualities and pastimes. And so then all the negative things, Vishwanath explains, like rivalry and ignorance and hatred, they can't make this drunkard suffer. The coronavirus and people dying and terrible politics in America, people saying terrible things, devotees quarreling. They can't touch you because you're drunk. Just like a drunkard, if someone comes and someone's really drunk and they go to that drunkard and you say, you know, your mother, and you say a terrible thing about his mother, he just laughs. You spit in his face or kick him, he just laughs because he's so drunk. So similarly, when a devotee becomes so completely intoxicated on the guna katamrita, the qualities and pastimes of Krishna, then they're not afraid of anything. And Vishwanath says, I'm drinking this and it's made me immortal. I'm not afraid of death. He says, by getting this kind of bhakti, you meet directly with the Lord. And then what do? You pray again for bhakti. So this is the nature of Krishna bhakti. It gives us some relishment. But to get that relishment, we have to practice niraparad bhajan. We have to give up offenses, and then we can get some ruci. That ruci comes in association with devotees when we're hearing and chanting. Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami gives a very beautiful description, very poetic. Chaitam Nilamrita Pura, Krishna Lila Sukarpura, Duhe mile hoya sumadurja. He says in this Chaitanya Leela, it's Amritapur, it's full of nectar. Krishna Leela Sukarpur. And the pastimes of Krishna are just like nice karpur, camphor. Dui mile hoya sumadurja. And when these two are mixed together, they become very, very nice, very sweet. Sadhu Guru Prasade Tahaje Ashvade Sejane Madhuja Prachura. But they can only be relished. Sadhu Guru Prasade, in association with the devotees. Taha Je Ashvade, to relish Ashvadana. Sejane Madhuja Prachura. Then you can understand the sweetness of bhakti. When we associate with the devotees in a proper way. Jelila Amrita Vine Kaya Jari Anapane Tobe Bhakti Durbala Jivan Jada Eka Bindu Pane Utfulita Tanumane Hasigaya Koraye Nartana. Jailila Amrita Bini Kaya Jari Anapani. He says that someone Kaya Jari Anapani, they become strong by eating grains. But if they don't taste the nectar of these pastimes of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Krishna, and they only eat these ordinary grains, then Tabe Bhakti Durbala Jivan, then life becomes weak. He says, but Jada Eka Bindu Pani, Upalita Tanumani, if you just take one drop, but you have to, pani means water, you have to drink that. Then Upalita Tanumani, then you become completely ecstatic, and Hasigai Korina Tan. You begin to laugh, and sing, and dance. Srila Prabhupada commented on this verse. This is the last verse in Madhya Leela. He says, all the devotees connected with the Krishna consciousness movement must read all the books that have been translated. The Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, and others. Otherwise, after some time, they'll simply eat, sleep, and fall down from their position. Thus, they'll miss the opportunity to attain eternal, blissful life of transcendental pleasure. So let's contemplate again this sequence given in the Siksastaka up to this point, which Bhaktivinoda describes. The first verse describes something about Shraddha. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in his commentary in that first verse, he says there's two broad divisions of Shraddha, Lokik and Paramartik, or common Shraddha, the faith of common people, which we might even see amongst devotees. Oh, this Maharaj, he's so advanced. Well, why is he so advanced? Because he has lots of followers. That's why. That's Lokik Shraddha, because everybody considers this to be true, therefore it must be true. Paramartik Shraddha, Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, it has two divisions. Sa, Sharta, Avardhanamohi Shraddha, which is faith, which is based in Shastra. And Bhaktivinoda says that it's based upon fear, that if I don't follow Shastra, then I'm going to go to hell. And the second is Bhagavat Lila Madhurja Logamohi Shraddha. And this Bhagavat Lila Madhurja Logamohi Shraddha is characterized by lobha, or by greed, which comes from hearing Harikatha, pastimes of Krishna, from a Premi Bhakta. In Jaiva Dharma, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, when he speaks about our process of sadhana, he says there's different levels of hearing. This Kramahina Shravana Dasa, which means hearing which is not proper. It's not based on Shastra. You're hearing something, but you're not hearing properly. You're not hearing from one person. Proper hearing means, proper medical treatment means I go to one doctor. I may go to 20 doctors, and they may be all good doctors. But if I'm going to different doctors every day, how am I going to make advancement? So sadhu vaidya, the sadhu is like a doctor. And Kramasuda Shravana Dasa, the pure path of hearing indicates that I'm hearing properly from one person. And Bhaktivinoda says that Krama Hina Shravanadasa indicates they're not hearing Leela. They're not hearing the pastimes of the Lord. They're just hearing some philosophy. But Krama Sudha Shravanadasa indicates Bhagavat Leela Madhurja Loba Mohishara. It means faith which comes by hearing from someone who has some ruci. So, but Bhaktivinoda, he says in some articles in Sajjana Toshini, that even that Shraddha is not enough, there also has to be ruci. And he says that even in karma and gyan, any kind of activity, some ruci has to be there. And when Shraddha is endowed with ruci for bhakti, Bhaktivinoda says that's saranapati. And he defines that as Krishnanubhritti cheshta, or the constant endeavor to serve Krishna, and the tendency for karma and fruitive activities entirely removed. Nadanam najanam nasundaram. It's completely removed, and saranapati is there. Mama janmani janmani shri bhavatad bhakti hoitaki tvaya. I just want a hoitaki bhakti. I don't even care about liberation. So then by Nishtha and Guru Seva, we develop this ruci. The Bhagavatam describes Shushusho Shadadana Vasudeva Katavichi Shan Mahat Sevaya Vipra Punya Tirthana Sevana. That when we render service to those pure devotees, then we develop some ruci. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he says there's two types of ruci. I want to get more technical about it. There's Vastu, Vasishtya Pikshani. That which is dependent on external things. And Vastu, the Vastu Vaisistya Apekshani, they like the kirtan and it sounds really nice. They like to hear when someone's an expert musician, someone sings very, very sweetly. But better than that is a type of ruci known as Vastu Vaisistya Anapekshani. It's not dependent upon any externals. And someone may get complete bliss just by hearing the name of Krishna, just like we've heard sometimes Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati would comment that he would pass articles, and this is a little confusing sometimes for devotees who are editors. I've been an editor for many years. If an article had the name of Krishna in it many times, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta liked that article. But what about if it has proper philosophy? Question. But because the name of Krishna was there, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had this kind of ruci vastu, vasishtya anapeksha. It's not dependent on external things. He got some taste from it, so he's very happy just to see the name of Krishna there. So bhakti, by nature, when we experience this happiness, it gives detachment as a secondary result. The Bhagavatam again describes Vasudeva, Bhagavati, Bhakti Yoga Hoksuje, Jnana Yatya Shavayagyam, Jnanam Chayara Hoitakam. That when someone cultivates bhakti, then Jnana and Vairagya automatically come. Nadanam Najanam Nasundarim, that's an external symptom of cultivating the bliss of bhakti. Narad Muni tells Prahlad Maharaj in the first canto, chapter 4 of the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, Krishna, Vishto yo Shmitameva Matto, Nityam Gayan Kampamano Rudamscha, Lokan Sarvan Udaran Samsritibyo, Vishnu Bhakti, Harshayan Asatanya. He's glorifying Prahlad Maharaj. He said that to him, that while you become a Vishta, completely absorbed in Krishna, then you became Ashmita. You forgot Ashmita Atma, all about yourself, because you're Mata, you're completely intoxicated. He's paraphrasing this verse we were reading from the fourth canto. And then Nityangayan Kampananam Rudan, you start calling out loudly, and you're dancing and singing and trembling, and you're doing it in front of all the three worlds. And in this way, Sarvan Udaran, you are delivering everyone and giving everyone great joy. So this is the nature of bhakti. Bhakti gives so much happiness. Rupa Goswami describes in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Swapapi ruchir eva shad bhakti tattvavabodhika. Yuktistu kevalanaiva yadasya apratishtata. He says that even swapapi ruci, even just a little taste in bhakti, shad bhakti tattva vodika. This is the passport to understanding bhakti tattva, the real nature of bhakti. He says, but on the other hand, just argument. Yuktastu kevalanaiva yadasya apratishtata. Argument is apratista. It has no sound foundation to it, and it doesn't help one to understand the true nature of bhakti. Our acharyas are described as 4 different types of happiness: Vishayananda, Brahmananda, Premananda, and Sevananda. Vishayananda is a happiness of sense gratification, but millions and millions of times greater than that is Brahmananda, or the happiness of Brahman. But millions of times greater happiness in Brahmananda is the happiness of Premananda, of ecstatic bliss. But millions of times greater than Premananda is Sevananda, service. And that service to the Vaishnavas, Bhaktivinoda Thakur is describing this sequence of events in the Siksastaka prayers. In the beginning is faith in the sadhu. And then in association with devotees, we begin to do bhajana kriya. And in that association with the devotees, and we develop something higher, we give up our anarthas, and we begin to render service to the devotees. And then we become free from anarthas, and we develop these 4 symptoms of niraparad bhajan. And then we come to the point of nadanam najanam sundari. There's a nice story in this regard. There was one devotee who was born in a Brahmin family in Kanyakubja, South India. His name was Sri Madhava Das. And he was a Vaishnava. When his wife left this world, he became detached from family life. And he left home. And he went to Jagannath Puri. And he was staying there in Puri near the ocean. And he was a very, very sober person. He was so much absorbed in his bhakti, his devotional activities, that he completely forgot all about eating and drinking. And sometimes he would go for 3 or 4 days without even eating or drinking anything, but his mind was just so much absorbed in the Lord. And although he's not thinking about his body, Krishna is anxious about the welfare of his devotees. So Lord Jagannath, on one occasion, the devotees offered some sayana bhog at the time of evening. And Lord Jagannath put some of that food aside. And he had Lakshmi Devi taken on a golden plate to the Bhajan Kutir of Sri Madhava Das. And Madhava Das, he was sitting in his cottage with his back to the door. And so when Lakshmi Devi came, all he could hear was the sound of her ankle bells. At that time, he was meditating on the divine couple in his heart. And then when Lakshmi Devi arrived, he saw this flash of lightning in the Bhajan Kutir. And then he turned around, but he didn't see Lakshmi Devi. And he just saw this plate of prasad there. And he realized, oh, this is the mercy of the Lord. So he offered obeisances to that prasad. He circumambulated it. He honored the prasad, and he kept the plate there. And the next morning, there's a number of stories like this in Jagannath Puri, by the way. But the next morning, when the Pandas, they opened Jagannath's temple to do their puja, they couldn't find that plate that they used for the Shine Bhog. And so they became very worried what's going to happen. They're going to beat us. And so they started searching here and there, and they found eventually in the Bhajan Kutir of Sri Madhava Das that golden plate. So they arrested him and they beat him up with a stick. And they found, though, that although they were beating him, nothing happened to his body. Because actually Lord Jagannath was accepting those bruises on his body. And later, when the Pandas, they went to worship Lord Jagannath, this was during Chandan Yatra, and they started to put some sandalwood paste on his body, they were horrified to see bruises all over Lord Jagannath's body. And Lord Jagannath told them, you did this to me because I'm the one who sent that plate of prasadam. And then you started beating my dear devotee, Sri Madhava Das, and so I protected him. And so then they realized we made a big mistake. And so then they went back and they offered obeisances to Sri Madhava Das, begged for forgiveness. On another occasion, the Sri Madhava Das, it was during the winter time in Puri. Generally, it's not so cold there, but there's maybe 1 or 2 weeks during the winter that it gets pretty cold. Sometimes you can see your breath. And he felt very, very cold at night. And while he was shaking, the deities in the temple, they began to shake. And then Lord Jagannath, finally, he came and covered Madhava Das's body with his blanket. On another occasion, Sri Madhava, he'd eaten some wrong thing. And so he was suffering from loose motions. And so he was staying by the ocean side so he could take care of his body and take bath. But he became so thin and weak, he couldn't fetch water to drink. And he was just laying there unconscious. And Lord Jagannath personally came and brought him water. And when he returned to external consciousness, Madhava, he recognized the Lord. And he said, what are you doing? Huh? Because the Lord had not only come and given him water, but he also cleansed his body, because Madhava Das, his body became very filthy because he couldn't control his bowel movements. And Lord Jagannath said, no. He said, I have this dilemma. I can't tolerate for a moment to see your suffering. And Madhava Das told him, he said, well, if that's the case, then you should take away my suffering forever, because I'm getting more distressed by seeing you offering me service than the distress I was by the cold. And then Jagannath told him, look, I have a problem here. If I relieve you of all your pain, but you still have some karma to suffer and enjoy, then I won't be following the laws of nature that I've given. You have to suffer or enjoy the fruits of your karma. So instead of violating this law, I put aside my position as God to come and engage in your service. And that's why I won't remove your pain eternally. But listen to another reason why I'm doing this service, because I thought no one should make fun of my devotee. No one should think that my devotee is in some kind of distressed condition. So Madhava Das's one more little story I want to tell about him, that his fame was increasing day by day, and he started going door to door begging because everybody was glorifying him. And Madhava Das thought, well, if I go and I beg, then people will make fun of me and they won't give me proper respect. And that'll be good, because I don't want respect. I don't want jana. I don't want mundane followers. I don't want wealth. Bhavatad bhakti hoitakita. All I want is pure bhakti. And one day, Madhava Das went to the house of a lady and knocked on the door. And she opened the door and he said, Bo Mata Bhagavati Bhikshandehi, dear Mata, please give me some alms. And that lady was very angry to see him, a stupid beggar. She had a rag that she'd been using to clean the floor with in the kitchen in her hand, a wet rag, and she threw it in his face. And Madhava Das, he just took it. He said, oh, thank you very much. That's very good. You're such a kind person. You gave me something. So he took that dirty cloth and he washed it really nicely. He dried it out. And then he made ghee wicks out of it. And he used those to offer ghee wicks, offer a lamp to the Lord. And as soon as he offered those ghee wicks and the lamp to the Lord, then the darkness in that lady's heart immediately vanished. And so then the next day, when Madhava Das again went to her house to see that lady, as soon as she saw him, she fell down at his feet and begged forgiveness. So this is the nature of a devotee. He's not done on the Janama. He doesn't want followers. He doesn't care for popularity. He doesn't care if people abuse him. He doesn't need that. Madhava Das was going and begging because he didn't want people to give him respect. But all the devotees want. Bhavatad Bhakti Hoitakitvaye. They simply want devotion to Krishna. They want to please Krishna for Krishna's pleasure. Birth after birth, indicating even they don't care if they get liberation. So we spoke on a lot of things. I think properly to do this and make this presentation, and we only covered half the thoughts we had about this verse, but to properly even speak on what we just did, probably we should spread out over 3 or 4 days so devotees can properly digest it instead of you're running using all these technical terms and things, because we wanted to give some respect to Thakur Bhaktivinoda and try to understand his comments on this Siksastaka prayer. So I'd like to stop here And my humble request to the devotees, we're also live streaming on Facebook, and at the same time we're on Zoom. I'd like to invite the devotees, request if anybody has any reflections, something that you liked from the discussion, or maybe some of the comments or questions from anybody. Does anybody have anything at this time?
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. It was a wonderful class on Siksastaka Watch 4. I learned a lot. You mentioned a lot about Ruci, and Krishna, as you I mentioned before, is multidimensional. He has, you have a liking for Krishna in the form of his shringar, or form of his prasadam, or in the form of his yatras. So the question becomes, Ruci is, Prabhuji, is all about interest or inclination. The question is, if a person is having some Ruci to something, and Krishna is multidimensional, instead of trying to be, like a jack of all trades, how the person or how the seniors should guide a person to intensify that Ruci so that the other elements you talked about, the attachment and all these things, will not there, and he or she focuses on that angle of Ruci. How does a person address that?
Well, you're speaking as a preacher for devotees, which is a good motivation. I'd like to address that, but first I'd like to address it in another, perhaps we could say more absolute consideration. And that is, we understand from the pastimes of great devotees, for example, in Hari Bhakti Sudhadoya, there's a story about one mouse that was, during the month of Kartik, was going to eat a ghee wick, and his face caught on fire and he died. And that mouse went to Prapanchika Vaikuntha, a Vaikuntha planet in this material universe, and got to associate with the Lord for 100 years. And then he fell down, because you can't go to the spiritual world by performing Agyata Sukriti. He came because although he was doing bhakti, he was Agyata. So he took birth again. And this birth, his next birth, he started practicing Gyata Sukriti. And that Gyata Sukriti was also, he had some relishment. He was really into offering lamps. Similarly, sometimes we see devotees who, when they first saw the Lord, maybe they would see his lotus feet first, or they would see his lotus face. Whatever thing they saw first, they would develop some natural attraction for. And it's not an artificial thing. They would naturally cultivate that. Now, as preachers, when we're dealing with new people who really don't have Ruci yet, there's some Ruci of Bas, maybe, some shadow of Ruci. We should try to encourage that in whatever way we see in them, which I think you're kind of inferring in your comment question. Sometimes we see that some people come and they don't like the philosophy. Maybe even they don't like kirtan, but they really like the food. And so that's okay. We should just encourage them. Well, you come and take lots of prasadam. And next week we're going to have some very special prasadam. So you can come and take advantage of that. And or if they like the kirtan, but they don't like the philosophy, they like the philosophy, they don't like the kirtan, whatever thing they have some attraction for, we can encourage them like that initially, because they have some kind of shadow of a taste. And then after practicing bhakti for some time and their heart becomes more purified, they'll appreciate the Lord in other forms. And I agree, I think, kind of with the implicit comment in your question that we shouldn't try to force someone to do activities that they don't like. If someone comes and they're just really, they like to serve by cutting vegetables or doing some humble service, we shouldn't try to insist that they go out on book distribution if they're uncomfortable with that. They don't feel comfortable with devotees. No, that's fine. You just do this. But we speak to them about book distribution, perhaps. And we tell them this by helping to cut the vegetables, by cleaning the temple. You're helping for preaching, you're helping people. And we always try to connect it to these other things. But we don't discourage them in the beginning. And we see Srila Prabhupada did like that. And that's the nature of expert Vaishnavas. They engage people according to their propensity, according to their psychophysical nature, even from the beginning. Is that helpful, Prabhuji?
Yeah, thank you so much, Prabhuji. And on the aspect of Ruci, our first Ruci or the first interest, I would imagine, would be on the Naam or the names of Hari or Krishna. Is that a valid assumption? Our first Ruci should be on the Naam.
Well, generally, but there may be some people who are so demoniac they can't chant. Srila Prabhupada sometimes saw people, they were like that, and Prabhupada just told them, anyway, you just take prasadam. That's easy to digest sometimes. But that name, we learned from Siksastaka, Chaitodarpana and Marjana. The first thing is, by chanting, then we'll become purified. A question arises, if I can deviate for a moment. There's a nice commentary we were hearing from a teacher in Orissa by one of the disciples of Shamananda Prabhu in India, commentary in Siksastaka. And it says that the first verse describes it that what's the first verse, please? Siksastaka. Chaitodarpana Marjanam Bhava Mahadevadana Vapanam Shreya Kairo Chandrika Vitayanam Vidyavadu Jivanam Anandam Bodhivadam Patipadam Pranamita Swadhanam Sarvatma Snapanam Vijayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam. It finishes by saying Param Vijayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam. All glories of Shri Krishna Sankirtanam. So in the commentary, he raises a question. What kind of Sankirtan? You're a Deshi Bhakta, you know. Are you talking about Guna Kirtan? Are you talking about Leela Kirtan? What kind of Kirtan are you talking about? Rup Kirtan, the Kirtan where we glorify Krishna's form, Kirtan where we glorify his qualities or his pastimes, or Nam Kirtan. Which Kirtan are you talking about? And Mahaprabhu answers it in the next verse, Nam Namakari Bahuda Jasara Shaktis, by Nam Kirtan, by chanting the holy names, and then everything else will automatically come. And the Guna Kirtan and the Leela Kirtan, or there's other different types of Kirtan will come later on. But we begin with that Nam Kirtan. But that comes from association with the devotees. The first thing our acharyas have commented, we have to have faith in the devotees. And we may think that it begins with the holy name. It begins with faith in the devotees. And with the faith in the devotee, then we get some access to the holy name. And we start chanting. And maybe we don't have still so much faith, deep faith in the holy name. But when our heart starts becoming purified, then we develop higher faith in the devotees. And the symptom of that is we're interested in Krishna Katha. And we can start hearing, when we have faith and to hear something from the devotees deeply. Whereas before, how many rounds do I chant? How do I chant? And it's just kind of maybe a ritualistic thing. But when our heart becomes more purified, then we develop more faith, and we develop faith in Krishna Katha. And then from that Krishna Katha, we can begin to perform Niraparat Bhajan. And we can become free from our offenses and have these 4 symptoms of Niraparat Bhajan. I think that's okay.
Thanks so much.
Hare Krishna. So nice to see you. So everybody we're speaking to here, you're all at your homes, right? Nobody's at the temple, or maybe a pujari too or something? Are you still
Yeah, mostly they are. Yes, Madhavendra Prabhu, most of the devotees have locked down from their homes because our temple, as Madhavendra Prabhu will update, is mostly the resident devotees. And at this time, there is probably the Shringar going on. So everybody is signed up from home.
Yeah, right now the devotees are from home, but slowly we are opening up where our congregation devotees who used to go to serve at the temple, they slowly started coming to serve the temple.
I hope I'll say something a little mundane. I have some devotee doctor friends who made this recommendation. In 1918, when the Spanish flu came about, 500 million people got it. 50 million people died. And the first wave of that, not so many people died. And they were doing some kind of social distancing, or I don't know what they called it, but they were keeping a distance. And things went down, and they thought, oh, it's okay now. And they started associating. And then there was a second and third wave, and that's when the majority of people died. I know here in India, they're talking about opening some things up, but we have our little pod, our little group. There's 3 of us, and we're going to keep to ourselves. We're going to wait for another few weeks and see before we start taking trains and buses and whatever, moving around a lot. So that's my humble suggestion to devotees, out of love for them. Take care of yourself. Don't be in a big rush or anything. Nice to see the devotees in Montreal there too. Interesting.
Yeah.
So let me read something from Facebook. David Norman Wilmot, I don't know if you have a devotee named Prabhuji, I'm sorry. He writes, thank you very much. I opened the Facebook app. Fortunately, stumbled into your katha. One thing gives me anxiety. The Lord seemed to say he wouldn't intervene with Madhavadasa's karma in respect of his own material laws. Therefore, he chose instead to render relieving service to his devotee. This causes me some confusion when I consider Krishna's promise in the Gita 1866 to deliver a surrendered soul from all reaction to all sins, past, present, and future. Of course, I'm in anxiety because I know I deserve suffering reactions that I don't really want. Very nice question. Well, this story is told in such a way, too, for common people. And Krishna is behaving in a certain way for them, but it's a fact that Krishna says, Sarvadharma Purtigamami Kam Sharanam Vadaham Tvam Sarva Papagiri. If someone surrenders to me, they have no karma. And so Madhavadasa, he didn't have any karma. But still, Krishna's making it appear like that. And Krishna, sometimes he hides the glories of his devotee. And that's my understanding of this particular story from Jagannath Puri, that Krishna didn't want common people to understand the glories of Sudha Bhakti, and they can become free from their karma and things just by practicing it. If they were to do that, they would understand that, and they might try to take advantage of Bhakti. So Murari Prabhu is commenting something. Let me read his thing. Pranams, nice to be able to join you live. I was thinking back to something you said in the previous katha. Bhaktivinoda Thakur said the qualification to chant the holy name is being unable to give up sense gratification, but nonetheless being determined. I like the point you made today about how the Ruci comes in association with the devotees. That's from Murari Gopal. Thank you, Prabhu. Very nice. Just Bhaktivinoda Thakur in Bhajan Rahasya, he says that what is Nam-bhajan adhikar, the qualification to do Nam-bhajan, and he quotes a verse from the 11th canto, which begins with the words, Jatashara Katasu, Navina Sarva Karmasu. That someone, they have faith in Krishna Katha, but they can't give up their sense gratification. And Krishna advises in that situation, and anyway, you just go on doing your sense gratification, but don't stop doing your bhakti. And if you continue doing that bhakti, then eventually you'll give up those nonsense things. Okay, anybody else have any questions or comments, reflections? Madhupati, do you want to add anything?
Well, thank you very much. When you mention about Ruci, Prabhuji, since Siksastaka verses is mostly focusing on the holy name, the Ruci would be more on the holy name, right?
Yes, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur speaks about that too. He indicates especially Nam Ruci. But this in the same way that we don't separate Radha from Krishna, we don't separate Krishna's energies, the Shakti from the Shaktiman. We also, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati says, we shouldn't try to separate Krishna Nam from Krishna Katha. And Krishna Katha is, he says, that's the form of Srimati Radharani. And both things should go together. And so when we have Ruci for one, it means we'll have Ruci for both.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so maybe I'll go ahead and stop there. Let me just check real quick again if anybody else has any comments or anything. So I want to thank you, devotees, very much for giving me some chance to do some katha. And I hope you.
Also, today is Mother's Day, Madhavananda Prabhu, and I know you. Few years back, you gave a wonderful lecture
on Mother's Day. Yes, you remember that, Hare Krishna.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a brahmachari. I'm a mamachari. I think I spoke about mamacharis.
Yes.
In my class also. And how Krishna and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu are not brahmacharis, they're mamacharis. And I'm a devotee of my mother.
Yeah.
And that's very important. Thank you for reminding me of that, Prabhuji. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki jai.
We would like to thank His Grace Madhavananda Prabhu with a loud Haribol. Haribol.
Vanchakalpadurubhischa, Kripasunadevaccha, Adikanam Pavani, Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha, Nanda Kodi Vaishnava.